Have you ever looked at your life and wondered why things seem to be falling apart at the very moment you are trying so hard to hold them together? Perhaps a relationship has changed. Perhaps the door you were certain would open has remained closed. Perhaps you have been waiting for clarity, for healing, for some small sign that tells you everything is going to be all right. And somewhere beneath all of that waiting, there is a quiet question you may be afraid to ask. What if my life is not going wrong at all? What if something within me is being invited to see all of this differently? There are moments when life refuses to follow the picture you created for it. You believed you knew where you were going. You had an idea of who would remain beside you, what your future would look like, how long certain difficulties should last, and when the answers should arrive. Then something changed. And because the change did not match the plan in your mind, fear whispered that something had gone wrong. But perhaps this is where a different understanding can begin. You may have spent years believing that peace would arrive when your circumstances finally became peaceful, when the uncertainty disappeared, when someone understood you, when the past stopped hurting, when you knew exactly what to do next. You may have told yourself, without even realizing it, when life becomes the way I need it to be, then I will allow myself to rest. And yet life keeps changing. People change, bodies change, relationships change, seasons change. What once felt permanent becomes temporary. What once seemed essential sometimes disappears. And if your peace depends entirely on everything outside you remaining exactly as you prefer, then peace becomes something fragile. It becomes something the world can give you and take away. There is another possibility. Perhaps peace was never meant to depend on the world becoming predictable. Perhaps peace begins when you discover a place within yourself that does not need every question answered before it can become still. Imagine standing beside a river. You notice that the water never asks permission to move around the stones. It does not spend its energy arguing with the bend in the riverbank. It continues, it adjusts, it flows, and somehow, without forcing its way forward, it reaches places it could never have reached by remaining still. Your life has currents too. Sometimes you recognize them immediately. At other times, they carry you away from something you were certain you needed. This is when the ego becomes frightened. It wants a map. It wants guarantees. It wants to know where the river is going before it agrees to move with it. The ego says, show me the destination, and then I will trust. The deeper self seems to whisper something very different. Trust. And you may discover that you never needed to see the entire journey. This does not mean pretending that loss does not hurt. It does not mean calling every painful experience good. And it certainly does not mean ignoring your feelings. Your sadness deserves to be felt. Your disappointment can be acknowledged. Your uncertainty is part of being human. But there is a difference between feeling pain and building your identity around the belief that life has betrayed you. Perhaps someone left your life, and for months you wondered what was wrong with you. You replayed conversations in your mind. You imagined what you could have said differently. You compared yourself with others. You searched for an explanation that would finally allow you to feel whole again. Then one quiet day, perhaps while driving, walking, sitting beside a window, or simply waking before everyone else, you noticed something unexpected. You were still here. Beneath the hurt, something in you had remained untouched. The relationship had changed, but the presence within you had not disappeared. The future had changed, but your capacity to love had not disappeared. Someone else's choice had changed, but the deepest part of who you are had not been taken from you. And perhaps this is one of life's quiet invitations, to discover what remains when the things you thought defined you begin to change. You are not only your relationships, you are not only your history, you are not the mistakes you still remember at 2 a.m. You are not the approval you received, nor are you the rejection that wounded you. Beneath these experiences, there is an awareness that has been watching your entire life unfold. That awareness does not need to prove its worth. It simply is. When you begin touching that place within yourself, even for a few seconds, something softens. You no longer need to solve your entire future today. You begin to understand that the mind may be confused while the deeper self can still be peaceful. This is where the idea that everything is aligning for your highest good takes on a different meaning. It does not have to mean that every wish will come true exactly as you imagine. It does not have to mean that every closed door will suddenly reopen or that nothing difficult will ever happen again. Perhaps alignment is something quieter and more profound. Perhaps alignment is what happens when you stop abandoning yourself in order to control life. When you choose understanding instead of judgment, something aligns. When you release an old resentment that has occupied your heart for years, something aligns. When you stop asking another person to determine your worth, something aligns. When you sit quietly with uncertainty instead of immediately running from it, something aligns. When you choose love where fear once controlled your thinking, something aligns. Not necessarily out there at first, within you, and what happens within you changes the way you meet everything outside you. Think about how exhausting it is to constantly argue with reality. The mind says, this should have happened sooner. They should have treated me differently. I should be further along. I should have known better. My life should not look like this. Every should becomes another small battle with what already is. You cannot change yesterday by resenting it today. You cannot create peace tomorrow by refusing peace in this moment. And you cannot hear the quiet wisdom within you while every part of your mind is demanding that life explain itself. There comes a moment when you may begin asking a gentler question. Instead of, why is this happening to me, you might ask, what is this moment showing me about what I am still holding? Perhaps it is showing you how deeply you need approval. Perhaps it is revealing a fear of being alone. Perhaps it is bringing an old wound to the surface because you are finally ready to meet it with compassion instead of shame. Perhaps the delay you resent is teaching you that your peace cannot depend upon a timetable. Perhaps the ending you feared is creating an empty space where a more authentic version of your life can eventually emerge. You do not have to know yet. A seed beneath the soil does not look like a garden. For a time, it appears that nothing is happening. There is darkness, there is waiting, there is no visible evidence of flowers. Yet something is moving. Much of your inner life happens this way. There may be seasons when you cannot see what is changing because the change is occurring beneath the surface. Old identities are loosening. Old fears are becoming visible. Attachments you once considered love are being questioned. The need to control is slowly becoming too exhausting to maintain. And you may call this confusion, but perhaps confusion sometimes appears when an old way of seeing life can no longer carry you forward. There is wisdom in not rushing to label every uncertain season as failure. You may simply be between versions of yourself, not becoming someone entirely new, but remembering someone who was there before fear told you who you had to be, before comparison taught you that you were behind, before disappointment convinced you to close your heart, before the ego persuaded you that control was the same thing as safety. That deeper self has never left. It waits quietly beneath the noise. And maybe this season of your life is not asking you to work harder at controlling the river. Maybe it is asking you to loosen your grip on the shore. There is something very peaceful about realizing that you do not have to understand everything today. You can meet this moment as it is. You can breathe without solving the future. You can forgive without rewriting the past. You can feel sadness without deciding that sadness is who you are. You can experience uncertainty without making uncertainty your enemy. And slowly, the question changes. You stop asking, how can I make everything go according to my plan? You begin asking, how can I remain connected to love while life unfolds? That question leads somewhere very different, because once you begin looking closely, you may discover that much of what you have called misalignment was actually the pain of your expectations colliding with reality. And beneath those expectations is something worth understanding, the part of you that believes it must control life in order to feel safe. That part is not your enemy. It simply needs to be seen. And when you begin to see it clearly, without judgment, you may discover that the freedom you have been searching for does not begin by controlling what happens next. It begins by understanding who within you is so afraid of not knowing. When you begin to notice the part of you that is afraid of not knowing, you may discover something surprising. Much of your exhaustion does not come from life itself. It comes from the constant effort to make life conform to the picture in your mind. The ego loves pictures. It creates an image of how your relationship should look, how your family should behave, where you should be at a certain age, how quickly healing should happen, and what your future should become. Then it compares reality with that image. Whenever life does not match, the ego declares that something is wrong. This happens so quietly that you may not even notice it. You wake in the morning, and before your feet touch the floor, the mind has already begun measuring your life. You remember what has not happened yet. You think about someone who has not responded. You wonder whether you are falling behind. You imagine what other people are doing. You replay yesterday and rehearse tomorrow. And suddenly you are no longer living in this morning. You are living inside a mental argument with your life. Perhaps this is one reason peace can feel so distant. You may be searching for peace in circumstances while the disturbance is being created by the way you are relating to those circumstances. Imagine the sky on a stormy afternoon. Clouds gather, thunder moves across the horizon, rain begins to fall. If you looked only at the clouds, you might believe the entire sky had become dark. But the sky itself has not disappeared. Beyond the storm, there is still openness. Your awareness is a little like that sky. Thoughts appear, fear appears, anger appears, uncertainty appears. But they are experiences moving through awareness. They are not the totality of who you are. The ego would have you believe otherwise. It says, I am anxious. But perhaps you could gently notice anxiety is moving through me. It says, I am lost. Perhaps you could notice, I do not know what comes next. Those statements may sound similar, but inwardly they are very different. One turns a temporary experience into an identity, the other leaves space around it. And that space is where awareness begins. Awareness does not fight the ego, it simply sees it. You do not have to become angry with yourself because you want control. You do not need to judge yourself for feeling afraid. Judgment would only create another layer of conflict. Instead, you can become curious. What am I afraid will happen if I let go? That question can reveal so much. Maybe you are afraid that if you stop trying to control another person, they will leave. Maybe you fear that if you stop pleasing everyone, they will no longer approve of you. Maybe you believe that if you stop worrying, you will become careless and something terrible will happen. Sometimes worry disguises itself as responsibility. You may have spent years believing that worrying about someone proves that you love them. You imagine every possible problem. You try to anticipate every danger. You carry their future in your mind as though your tension could somehow protect them. But love and fear do not feel the same within you. Love can care deeply without trying to possess. Love can offer guidance without demanding obedience. Love can remain present without controlling another person's journey. Think of a parent watching an adult child make a decision they would not choose themselves. The impulse may be to interfere, persuade, warn, and control. Beneath that impulse is often genuine love, but mixed with fear. The parent thinks, if I can make them choose correctly, I can prevent pain. Yet every life has its own path of learning. Sometimes loving another person means allowing them the dignity of their own experience. And sometimes loving yourself means giving yourself that same dignity. You have made choices you would not make today. You have trusted people who disappointed you. You have remained in places too long. You have left places too soon. You have spoken from fear. You have stayed silent when you wished you had spoken. The ego can take these memories and build a courtroom inside your mind. It becomes the prosecutor, the witness, and the judge. You should have known. You wasted so much time. Look where everyone else is now. And because the past cannot answer back, the trial continues endlessly. But awareness asks a different question. Who were you when you made that choice? Perhaps you were doing the best you could with the awareness you had then. Perhaps you were trying to be loved. Perhaps you were afraid. Perhaps you had not yet learned how to set a boundary. Perhaps you were repeating something you had seen all your life. Understanding does not remove responsibility. It removes cruelty. And there is a profound difference between taking responsibility for your life and punishing yourself for having been human. You can learn without condemning yourself. You can change without hating who you used to be. You can look back and say, I understand more now. That is growth without violence toward yourself. And this becomes especially important when comparison enters your life. Comparison is another way the ego tries to create certainty. It looks outward to determine whether you are doing life correctly. Someone you know appears happier. Someone has found love. Someone seems more spiritually peaceful. Someone your age appears to have everything figured out. You see a small window into their life and compare it with the entire landscape of your own. Then the mind whispers, you are behind. But behind whom? A tree does not look at another tree in the forest and decide that it has failed because its branches are different. One tree flowers early, another grows slowly. One bends toward the sunlight. Another survives years of wind and becomes strong in ways no one can see. Nature does not seem embarrassed by timing. Only the human mind creates a schedule and then suffers when life refuses to follow it. Perhaps you are not late. Perhaps there is no universal clock measuring the awakening of your soul. Your life is unfolding through experiences that belong to your path. Some will make sense immediately. Others may take years before you understand what they opened within you. And some may never receive a satisfying explanation. Can you still be at peace? This is where trust becomes more than a comforting idea. Trust becomes a willingness to live without demanding guarantees. The ego says, tell me this will work out and then I will relax. Trust says, even if I cannot see the outcome, I can choose how I meet this moment. This is not passive resignation. It is not giving up your ability to make choices. You can still act. You can still leave situations that harm you. You can still speak honestly. You can still change direction. But action born from panic feels very different from action born from inner clarity. Imagine standing in muddy water. If you become frightened and begin kicking wildly, the water grows cloudier. You cannot see the bottom, so you move even more desperately, which stirs up more mud. Sometimes the mind works this way. You do not know what to do, so you think harder. You replay every possibility. You ask everyone for advice. You search for signs. You imagine the worst outcome, and then the best outcome, and then the worst again. The water becomes darker. What if, for a moment, you became still? The mud would begin to settle on its own. Clarity often arrives this way, not because you forced an answer, but because you became quiet enough to recognize what was already there. There may be a situation in your life right now that you have been trying to solve entirely with thought. Perhaps you have analyzed it from every direction. You have created conversations in your head that have never happened. You have imagined futures that do not yet exist. Notice what happens in your body when you do this. The shoulders tighten. The breath becomes shallow. The jaw becomes tense. The present moment disappears. And all of this may be happening because the ego believes that enough thinking will eventually eliminate uncertainty. But uncertainty is woven into being alive. You did not know every person you would meet when you began your journey. You did not know which experiences would change you. You did not know which disappointments would eventually redirect your life. You have already traveled through thousands of moments without knowing what came next. And yet here you are. Perhaps there is wisdom in remembering that. Not as proof that nothing difficult will happen, but as a reminder that you have a deeper capacity to meet life than fear would have you believe. This deeper capacity becomes easier to recognize when you stop identifying with every thought. A thought can say, I will always be alone. That does not make it a prophecy. A thought can say, nothing is working. That does not make it reality. A thought can say, I am not enough. That does not make it truth. Thoughts are powerful when they pass unnoticed. Once they are seen, you gain a little space. You can say, there is that old thought again. And perhaps you smile gently at it. Not because the pain behind it is unimportant, but because you no longer need to give every thought authority over your inner world. This is one of the quiet ways awareness transforms life. The thought may still appear, but you do not have to follow it. The fear may still arise, but you do not have to build a home inside it. The ego may still compare, but you can recognize comparison and return to yourself. You may even begin noticing how often you have left yourself in order to be accepted by others. People-pleasing can look like kindness from the outside, but inside it may be driven by fear. You say yes when your heart is asking for rest. You hide what you truly feel because you are afraid someone will be disappointed. You become whatever the room requires. And slowly, you lose contact with the quiet voice within you. Then one day you feel disconnected and wonder why. Perhaps nothing is wrong with you. Perhaps you have simply spent too much time listening outward and not enough time listening inward. There is a difference between loving others and abandoning yourself for them. Love does not require you to disappear. You can be compassionate and still say no. You can forgive and still create distance. You can understand someone's pain without allowing that pain to become your responsibility. You can love another person without asking them to complete you. This is where attachment deserves gentle attention. Attachment often says, I need this person, this outcome, or this situation to remain exactly as it is so that I can feel safe. Love says, I value this deeply, but I do not want fear to turn love into possession. This can be difficult because attachment often hides inside beautiful words. I cannot live without you. You are everything to me. My happiness depends on you. These may sound romantic, but spiritually they can reveal how much responsibility we have placed outside ourselves. No person can permanently carry the burden of being the source of your peace. They are human. They will change. They will misunderstand you. They will have their own fears and wounds. Some will remain, some will leave. When your entire inner world depends on their behavior, love becomes mixed with fear. And fear begins trying to control. This is why letting go does not mean loving less. Sometimes letting go allows you to love more purely. You release the demand that another person become who you need them to be. You stop trying to force a particular outcome. You allow life to reveal what is true. This can feel frightening at first because the ego interprets surrender as weakness. But surrender is not saying nothing matters. It is saying I will participate fully in life without demanding that life obey me. You still plant the garden, you water it, you care for the soil, but you do not pull the seed from the earth every morning to see whether it has begun growing. There are things in your life that may need this kind of patience, a healing that cannot be rushed, a relationship that needs space, a decision that needs silence, a grief that needs time, a new understanding of yourself that is only beginning to emerge. The ego asks, how long? The deeper self may answer, be here, just be here. This moment may not contain everything you want, but it contains life. The breath entering your body, the sounds around you, the simple awareness that you are here to experience them. When you return to this moment, even briefly, the future loses some of its power to frighten you. You begin to see that fear usually asks you to live somewhere that does not exist yet. It says, what if this happens? What if they leave? What if I fail? What if I never understand? And perhaps you can answer gently, if that moment arrives, I will meet it then. Right now, I am here. This is not denial, it is presence. And presence is where your power to choose love actually exists. You cannot choose love yesterday. You cannot choose love tomorrow. You can only choose it now. You can choose to speak to yourself with kindness now. You can choose not to send the message written from anger. You can choose to breathe before reacting. You can choose to release one old judgment. You can choose to listen instead of defending. You can choose to stop comparing your life with someone else's. These choices may appear small, but inner alignment is often built through very quiet moments. No one applauds when you decide not to continue an argument in your mind. No one sees the moment you forgive yourself for something you carried for 20 years. No one knows when you finally stop needing an apology you may never receive. But something changes within you. Energy that was trapped in resistance becomes available for living. You feel lighter, not because the past has changed, because your relationship with the past has changed. And perhaps this is why some disruptions eventually become unexpected doorways. A loss can reveal how tightly you were holding. A conflict can reveal an old wound. Loneliness can reveal how long you have been separated from yourself. Uncertainty can reveal your dependence on control. None of this means you should seek suffering or pretend pain is beautiful. It simply means that when pain arrives, it does not have to be meaningless. It can become a mirror. And if you look into that mirror without judgment, you may see the places within yourself that are asking for love. The ego will often resist this because it prefers to blame. If they had acted differently, I would be peaceful. If my childhood had been different, I would be whole. If life had given me what I wanted, I would not feel this way. There may be truth in recognizing how deeply others have affected you. Some experiences leave real wounds. Compassion never asks you to deny them. But there comes a point when continuing to make another person responsible for your inner state keeps you connected to the very thing you want to escape. This is where awareness begins opening the door to forgiveness. Not forgiveness as approval, not forgiveness as forgetting, not forgiveness as pretending nothing happened, forgiveness as freedom, the possibility that you no longer have to carry yesterday into every new morning. Perhaps you have been waiting for someone else to change before you allow yourself to heal. What if your healing does not require their transformation? What if your peace does not require their understanding? What if the door to freedom has been inside you all along? This realization can feel both frightening and beautiful because it returns responsibility for your inner world to you. Not blame, responsibility. The ability to respond. You begin seeing that between what happens and how you meet what happens, there is a sacred space. Within that space, you can become conscious. You can notice fear before becoming fear. You can notice judgment before speaking it. You can notice the desire to control before acting on it. And every time you notice, you return a little more deeply to yourself. Perhaps this is what alignment truly feels like. Not a life without uncertainty, not a world where everything goes according to plan, but a growing sense that you no longer need to fight every current. You can participate without controlling. You can care without clinging. You can love without possessing. You can feel without becoming lost in what you feel. You can allow an ending to be an ending without making it evidence that your life has failed. And slowly, you may begin to recognize something that the ego could never give you. The peace you were trying to create by controlling life was already waiting beneath the need to control. It was there beneath the comparison, beneath the fear, beneath the old stories, beneath the endless planning, like the sky behind the clouds. It had never truly gone anywhere. You had simply forgotten how to notice it. And when you begin noticing that quiet presence again, another question naturally arises. If you are not the fear, not the comparison, not the past, and not the voice that constantly demands certainty, then who are you beneath all of it? Perhaps that is where the journey becomes even quieter. Because once the ego has been seen, you no longer need to defeat it. You can begin turning toward what has always been underneath it. The part of you that knows how to forgive. The part that can love without demanding. The part that can remain still without knowing what tomorrow will bring. The part that has never been separate from the source from which all life arises. And perhaps what you have called alignment is not life finally arranging itself around your desires. Perhaps alignment begins when you remember how to arrange your inner world around love. When you begin arranging your inner world around love, something subtle changes in the way you experience life. The circumstances around you may not immediately become easier. The unanswered questions may still be there. Someone may still misunderstand you. A door may remain closed. The future may still be uncertain. Yet you are no longer standing before life with the same demand that everything must change before you are allowed to feel whole. You begin to understand that wholeness was never something the world could give you. It was something you had forgotten. Perhaps this is what returning to your true self really means. You are not creating a better version of yourself. You are not adding another identity to the many identities you already carry. You are gently removing what has covered the peaceful presence beneath them. Fear covered it. Judgment covered it. Resentment covered it. The need for approval covered it. The story of who you thought you had to become covered it. But underneath all of those layers, something quiet remained. Imagine sunlight behind a curtain. The room may appear dark, but the darkness does not mean the light has disappeared. You do not have to manufacture sunlight. You simply draw the curtain aside. Awareness begins drawing that curtain aside. Forgiveness draws it a little further. And forgiveness may be one of the most misunderstood invitations on the spiritual path. You may hear the word and immediately think of someone who hurt you. Perhaps they betrayed your trust. Perhaps they abandoned you when you needed them. Perhaps they said something you still remember years later. And a part of you may resist the idea of forgiveness because it sounds like saying that what happened was acceptable. But forgiveness does not have to mean that. You can recognize that something was painful and still release your need to carry it. You can forgive and maintain a boundary. You can forgive and never return to the relationship. You can forgive without receiving an apology. You can forgive without pretending you were not hurt. Forgiveness can simply mean that you no longer want yesterday to occupy today's heart. Consider how resentment works. Someone may have hurt you once, but the mind can repeat that injury hundreds of times. You remember the conversation while driving. You replay it before sleeping. You imagine what you should have said. You create arguments with someone who is not even in the room. The original moment has ended, but inwardly it continues. And each time you replay it, your body responds as though the event were happening again. Perhaps there comes a point when you quietly ask yourself, how long do I want to continue carrying this? Not because the other person deserves anything from you, because you deserve freedom. You might imagine resentment as holding a burning coal because you are waiting for someone else to feel the heat. Eventually, you notice whose hand is being burned. So you open your hand, not for them, for peace. And sometimes the person who most needs your forgiveness is yourself. There may be a younger version of you that you still judge harshly. You look back at what that person tolerated, believed, feared, or chose, and you wish they had known what you know now. But they could not have known what you know now. Life had not yet taught them. Maybe instead of standing above that younger self in judgment, you could sit beside them in imagination. See how frightened they were. See how much they wanted to be loved. See how desperately they were trying to make sense of the world. Perhaps you could say, I understand why you did that. I understand why you stayed. I understand why you were afraid. You don't have to carry my judgment anymore. Notice how different that feels. The past does not change, but something in the present begins to heal. This is why forgiveness is so closely connected to alignment. As long as you are fighting what has already happened, part of your energy remains anchored there. When forgiveness begins, that energy slowly returns. You become available to this moment again. And this moment is the only place where life can actually meet you. You may discover that surrender works in much the same way. Surrender is often confused with defeat. The ego hears the word and imagines giving up, becoming passive, or allowing life to push you around. But spiritual surrender can be something entirely different. It can mean releasing the argument with reality. Suppose you have been waiting for a relationship to become what you hoped it would be. You have explained yourself repeatedly. You have tried to be patient. You have changed yourself to keep the peace. You have held on to the potential of the relationship rather than experiencing the reality of it. There may come a quiet moment when you see clearly, not angrily, not dramatically, clearly. You realize that love cannot require you to continuously abandon yourself. And surrender may mean allowing yourself to see what is actually there instead of what you desperately want to be there. Perhaps you leave, perhaps you stay, but change the way you participate. Perhaps you create a boundary. The outward choice will be different for every person, but inwardly, the shift is the same. You stop negotiating with truth. There is enormous peace in that. Truth rarely needs the noise the ego gives it. It often arrives quietly. When you are exhausted from pretending. When resentment has become too heavy. When a direction no longer feels aligned with who you are. When fear is speaking louder than love. The difficulty is not always knowing. Sometimes the difficulty is trusting what you know. This is where intention becomes important. Intention, from a spiritual perspective, does not have to mean forcing the universe to produce a particular result. It can be much simpler. You can intend to meet life with love. You can intend to remain open. You can intend to listen more deeply. You can intend to stop using your past as evidence against your future. You can intend to bring peace into the room rather than waiting for the room to give peace to you. These intentions do not control other people. They change the energy you bring to your experience. Imagine walking into a difficult conversation with the intention to win. Your body prepares for conflict. You listen for weaknesses. You defend before the other person finishes speaking. Now imagine entering the same conversation with the intention to understand while remaining honest about your own needs. The conversation may still be difficult. The other person may still disagree, but you are different within it. You are no longer asking your ego to protect an identity at all costs. You are allowing awareness to participate. This is one way alignment becomes visible in ordinary life. It is not always mystical. Sometimes alignment is pausing before answering. Sometimes it is deciding that being peaceful matters more than having the last word. Sometimes it is apologizing without adding an explanation. Sometimes it is recognizing that you have outgrown a belief you once defended. Sometimes it is sitting alone for 10 quiet minutes and discovering that solitude is not the same as loneliness. There is a beautiful difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness says someone is missing, therefore something is missing in me. Aloneness can become a space where you remember your own presence. You sit quietly and notice the breath. You hear the sounds outside. You watch thoughts come and go. And for a moment, you are not someone's parent, partner, employee, friend, success, failure, or problem. You are simply here. There is something sacred in that simplicity. Perhaps this is one way you begin remembering your connection with Source. Source does not have to be understood as something distant, somewhere beyond you, waiting to judge whether you have lived correctly. You might consider Source as the loving intelligence that expresses itself through life itself, the intelligence that opens a flower, the intelligence that allows a wound to heal, the intelligence that turns seasons without human instruction, the intelligence that keeps your heart beating while you sleep. You are already participating in something larger than the thinking mind. You do not have to understand it completely to feel reverence for it. Stand beside the ocean and watch how impossible it would be to control every wave. Yet the ocean does not need your control to continue being the ocean. Maybe life does not need as much management as your fear has convinced you it does. You can make choices. You can set intentions. You can act with wisdom. But you can also leave room for mystery. This becomes especially meaningful when life takes something away. Loss has a way of revealing our deepest attachments. When someone you love is no longer present in the same way, the mind wants to return to how things were. It remembers a voice, a room, a habit, a particular afternoon. It says, if only. Grief deserves tenderness. There is no spiritual shortcut around it. You do not need to transform grief into gratitude before your heart is ready. But perhaps, over time, love can change its form. You begin to understand that the value of a relationship was not erased because it ended. What you received remains woven into who you are. A kindness remains. A lesson remains. A memory remains. Love may remain even when possession becomes impossible. And slowly, grief can teach something the ego finds difficult to accept. Loving deeply does not give us ownership over what we love. Everything in form changes. The seasons teach this every year. A tree does not accuse autumn of betrayal when its leaves begin to fall. It releases, then winter comes. For a while, the branches appear empty. If you did not understand seasons, you might look at that tree and think its life had ended. But beneath the surface, life is preparing. There are winters within you, too. Times when nothing seems to bloom. Times when you feel empty. Times when an old identity has fallen away, but the new season has not yet revealed itself. Do not be too quick to judge your winter. Something may be happening in the roots. Perhaps you are learning to be alone without abandoning yourself. Perhaps you are discovering that approval is not the same as love. Perhaps you are learning that a boundary can be compassionate. Perhaps you are seeing how much of your life was organized around fear. These realizations may not look impressive from the outside, but inwardly, roots are deepening. And when you begin trusting the seasons of your own life, the phrase, everything is aligning for my highest good, becomes less about predicting the future and more about how you meet the present. You stop demanding evidence. You begin participating. You ask, what would love look like here? Sometimes love looks like staying. Sometimes love looks like leaving. Sometimes love speaks. Sometimes love remains silent. Sometimes love embraces. Sometimes love closes the door gently. Love is not always pleasing. This matters for anyone who has confused love with people-pleasing. If you have spent much of your life trying to keep everyone comfortable, choosing yourself may initially feel selfish. You may feel guilty for saying no. You may worry that someone will think differently of you. But perhaps guilt does not always mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt appears because you are doing something unfamiliar. An old identity may be losing its grip. The identity of the person who never disappoints anyone. The person who fixes everything. The person who carries everyone. The person who never needs help. As those identities loosen, you may feel uncertain. Who are you if you are no longer performing them? This is another doorway back to the true self. You are more than the role. You can be loving without rescuing everyone. You can be generous without exhausting yourself. You can care without controlling. You can listen without absorbing every problem. You can belong without betraying yourself. The deeper your relationship with yourself becomes, the less desperately you need others to confirm that you are worthy. And then relationships begin changing. Not necessarily because other people change, but because you stop approaching them from emptiness. You no longer say, complete me. You begin saying inwardly, let us meet as two whole beings. You no longer ask, how can I make you love me? You begin wondering, can I remain connected to love regardless of whether you understand me? That does not make you indifferent. It makes love freer. And freedom is essential to alignment. You cannot truly surrender while gripping tightly. You cannot receive the present while demanding the past. You cannot hear your inner wisdom while constantly asking the world who you should be. At some point, the noise has to soften. Perhaps tonight, before you sleep, you could sit in silence for a few moments. Not to manifest anything. Not to ask for anything. Not to solve anything. Simply to be. Notice the breath moving without your effort. Notice how many sounds exist when you stop filling the room with thought. Notice that beneath the mental conversation, there is awareness. Then perhaps ask quietly, what am I ready to release? Do not force an answer. Maybe a person's face appears, maybe a memory, maybe an expectation, maybe nothing at all. Let the silence be enough. The purpose is not to receive instructions from somewhere outside you. It is to become quiet enough to hear what constant mental noise has been covering. You may already know what you need to forgive. You may already know what you need to stop chasing. You may already know where you are pretending. You may already know what your heart has been asking you to release. The wisdom may not be missing. It may simply have been drowned out. This is why returning to yourself often feels less like learning and more like remembering. You remember that peace is possible without certainty. You remember that your worth is not negotiated by other people's opinions. You remember that forgiveness frees the one who forgives. You remember that love does not require possession. You remember that the present moment is not an obstacle on the way to your life. It is your life. And gratitude begins to appear naturally from this understanding, not forced gratitude, not pretending to be grateful for pain before you are ready. A quieter gratitude. You become grateful for a morning you once would have overlooked, for the person who listens, for the body that has carried you through difficult years, for a lesson you resisted but now understand, for the strength that emerged without your noticing, for another opportunity to choose differently. Gratitude changes where attention rests. The ego looks at what is missing and says, when I receive that, I will be complete. Gratitude looks at what is here and whispers, life is already happening. And perhaps that is when alignment becomes something you can feel rather than something you are waiting to prove. You feel aligned when your thoughts, intentions, and actions begin moving in the same direction. You say you value peace, so you stop feeding unnecessary conflict. You say you value love, so you begin including yourself in that love. You say you trust life, so you loosen your demand to know everything in advance. You say you forgive, so you stop reopening the wound merely to keep the story alive. This does not happen perfectly. There will be days when the old fears return. There will be moments when you compare again. There will be situations where you try to control. Do not turn spiritual growth into another reason to judge yourself. Notice, return. That is enough. A river does not cease to be a river because it meets a stone. It moves around it. You can do the same. Every time fear appears, you can return to awareness. Every time resentment appears, you can remember forgiveness. Every time control tightens its grip, you can soften. Every time you forget who you are, you can remember again. Perhaps this is the true rhythm of spiritual life, not reaching a permanent state where nothing disturbs you, but learning the way home, again and again. And the more often you return, the more familiar home becomes. Eventually, you begin noticing that what you once called interruptions were often invitations. The difficult person invited you to discover boundaries. The uncertain season invited you to discover trust. The ending invited you to discover what could not be taken away. The silence invited you to hear yourself. The mistake invited compassion. The loss invited you to love without possession. The waiting invited you into the present. You do not need to say that every painful thing happened for a reason. Some mysteries may remain mysteries, but you can decide that nothing you have lived through has to prevent you from becoming more loving, more conscious, more peaceful, and more deeply connected with the source within you. That choice belongs to you. And perhaps your highest good has never been a perfect arrangement of circumstances. Perhaps your highest good is this awakening. To become so rooted in your true nature that changing circumstances no longer determine whether you can love. To become so present that you stop postponing your life. To become so forgiving that the past loses its authority over your heart. To become so trusting that uncertainty no longer feels like abandonment. And then you realize something quietly beautiful. Life may not have been asking you to become someone else. It may have been guiding you back toward who you were beneath all the fear. The peaceful presence, the awareness, the capacity to love, the connection that was never truly broken. You were not searching for a new self. You were remembering your true self. And from that place, the final part of this journey is not about understanding another spiritual idea. It is about bringing this remembrance into an ordinary morning, an ordinary conversation, an ordinary disappointment, and an ordinary day. Because truth becomes transformative when it stops being something you merely understand and becomes something you quietly live. And so the question becomes very simple. How do you carry this understanding into the ordinary moments of your life? How do you remember who you are when the phone rings with unexpected news, when someone disappoints you, when an old fear returns, or when you wake in the middle of the night wondering what the future will bring? Perhaps you begin by remembering that you do not have to live this perfectly. There will still be moments when you resist. There will be days when the ego wants control again. You may compare yourself, worry about tomorrow, replay something from yesterday, or temporarily forget everything you have remembered here. That does not mean you have lost your way. It simply means you are human. The spiritual journey is not about never becoming disturbed again. Perhaps it is about noticing sooner when you have moved away from your center and gently returning. You can return with one conscious breath, Before reaching for your phone in the morning, you might allow yourself a few moments of stillness. Feel the breath moving through you. Notice that before the plans, responsibilities, memories, and identities appear, you are already here. You do not need to ask the day to prove that it will be good. You can simply meet it. You might quietly ask yourself, what would it feel like to move through today without fighting life? Not without making choices, not without caring, not without taking action where action is needed, simply without the inner argument. If traffic slows you down, notice what rises within you. If someone speaks impatiently, notice the impulse to react. If plans change, notice how quickly the mind labels the change as a problem. These ordinary moments become opportunities for awareness. You begin catching the ego before it carries you too far away. And instead of judging yourself, you smile inwardly and return. Perhaps you can also make gratitude part of this return. Not gratitude as a requirement to pretend everything is wonderful, but gratitude as a way of seeing what fear often overlooks. Notice one simple thing: warm water, morning light, a familiar voice, a tree moving in the wind, a meal, the fact that you are breathing without having to remember how. Gratitude brings you back from the imaginary future into the living present, and the present begins to feel less empty. You may discover that much of what you thought was missing was hidden behind your attention to what had not yet arrived. Forgiveness can become another quiet practice. When an old memory returns, instead of feeding it immediately, pause. You might say inwardly, I do not need to carry this in the same way today. You do not have to force yourself to feel affection towards someone who hurt you. You do not need to erase the lesson. Simply notice whether carrying resentment is still serving the life you want to live within yourself. Sometimes forgiveness happens all at once. More often, it happens in layers. You release the story today, and it returns tomorrow. Then you release it again. This is not failure. A tree does not drop every leaf at exactly the same moment. Let your heart have seasons too. The same is true of letting go. There may be something, you have outgrown, but still find yourself reaching toward an old relationship, an identity, a dream that no longer feels like yours, the approval of someone who may never understand you. You do not have to rip it from your heart. You can loosen your grip. Sometimes that is enough for today. Say inwardly, if this belongs in my life, I do not need fear to hold it here. And if it is leaving, I do not want to lose myself trying to prevent its departure. Then breathe. There is freedom in allowing life to move. Look at the ocean. No wave remains at its highest point forever. It rises, forms, and returns. Yet the ocean loses nothing by allowing the wave to change. Perhaps there is something ocean-like within you. Experiences rise and fall. People arrive and depart. Roles begin and end. Your body changes. Your beliefs mature. Yet the awareness beneath these changes remains. Return there often, especially when you are uncertain, when you do not know what decision to make. Perhaps the first question does not need to be, which choice guarantees the outcome I want? You might ask, which choice allows me to remain closest to love, truth, and inner peace? Then listen. The answer may not arrive immediately. Give it silence. Not every question needs to be solved the moment it appears. Some answers are like seeds. They need darkness before they break open. Trust does not mean that you know what the seed will become. Trust means you stop digging it up every day to check whether life is working. You care for the soil. You remain attentive. You allow time to participate. And when fear returns, as it sometimes will, remember that fear is not proof that something is wrong. It may simply be an old part of you asking to be held with awareness. You can say, I see you. Then ask, what is true in this moment? Very often, the frightening future your mind has created is not happening now. Right now, there is a breath. Right now, there is awareness. Right now, there is another opportunity to choose how you meet life. And that is enough. Over time, something beautiful begins to happen. You stop needing constant signs that you are on the right path. You stop interpreting every delay as rejection. You stop believing that every ending means failure. You stop asking the world to repeatedly reassure you that you are worthy. There is a quieter knowing within you. You begin understanding that alignment is not a promise that everything outside you will become comfortable. Alignment is when you no longer abandon your inner peace every time life becomes uncomfortable. It is when love becomes more important than being right. When awareness becomes stronger than reaction, when forgiveness becomes more valuable than resentment, when truth becomes more important than approval, when presence becomes more real than the stories fear tells about tomorrow, then the words "everything is aligning for my highest good" no longer need to be a prediction. They become a way of meeting life. You can look at an uncertain future and say, "I do not know," and remain peaceful. You can look at the past and say, "I cannot change it," and remain loving. You can look at yourself and say, "I am still learning," and remain compassionate. Perhaps that is freedom. Not freedom from every difficult circumstance, but freedom from the belief that circumstances must obey you before you can return to yourself. So wherever you are in your life right now, perhaps you do not need to rush beyond this moment. If something is ending, let yourself honor the ending. If something is beginning, meet it without demanding guarantees. If you are waiting, allow the waiting to teach you presence. If you are grieving, be gentle with your heart. If you are healing, do not measure yourself every day. If you are uncertain, allow yourself not to know. You are not required to have the whole path illuminated. A small amount of light is enough for the step beneath your feet. And perhaps that is how life has always been lived. One breath, one choice, one act of forgiveness, one moment of awareness, one return to love, again and again, until one day you realize that the peace you spent so long searching for was never waiting at the end of the road. It was quietly walking with you. It was beneath the fear, beneath the striving, beneath the need to control, beneath every identity you thought you had to protect. It was the part of you that could observe everything without becoming everything. The part that could still love, the part that could forgive, the part that could become silent enough to feel connected with something larger than the story of one individual life. Perhaps you might call that source. Perhaps you might simply call it presence. The name matters less than the experience of remembering that you are not separate from life. You belong to it. And when you stop fighting the river, you may discover that the river was never trying to carry you away from yourself. It was carrying you deeper into yourself. So let today be simple. Be still when you can. Notice when fear speaks. Forgive what you are ready to release. Offer yourself the same compassion you so easily offer others. Be grateful for what is already here. Trust what you cannot yet see. And when you forget, return. There is no shame in returning. Returning is the practice. Returning is the remembering. Returning is the journey home. And perhaps when you look back at this season of your life someday, you will understand things that you cannot understand today. Perhaps you will see that a closed door redirected you, that an ending awakened you, that a period of silence brought you closer to yourself. Or perhaps some things will remain mysterious. You can be at peace with that too. You do not need every mystery solved in order to live with an open heart. You only need this moment. And in this moment, you can choose love over fear. You can choose awareness over judgment. You can choose forgiveness over resentment. You can choose trust over the endless demand for certainty. And with each quiet choice, you return to what has always been within you. You are not becoming worthy. You are remembering your worth. You are not creating a true self. You are uncovering the self that fear temporarily hid from your awareness. You are not forcing life into alignment. You are learning to live in harmony with the deeper intelligence already moving through life. Everything does not have to look perfect for something meaningful to be unfolding. You do not have to see the entire path to take the next peaceful step. And you do not have to wait for tomorrow to come home to yourself. You can come home now. If something in this journey reminded you of a truth you had forgotten, you are welcome to share that reflection in the comments. Sometimes the words you share become the reminder another person needs on their own journey. And if you would like to continue exploring inner peace, forgiveness, awareness, and the quiet return to your true self, you can subscribe and join us for the journeys still to come. Until then, carry this gently with you. You do not need to chase peace. Become quiet enough to notice where it already lives. You do not need to force the river. Learn to trust its movement. And you do not need to become someone new. Beneath everything you have carried, beneath everything you have feared, beneath every story about who you thought you needed to be, there is still a quiet presence waiting to be remembered. Return to it and let life unfold from there.